Hello and welcome to today's stream. Today we're going to be looking at Blender OSM. It's OpenStreetMap and terrain for Blender. So OpenStreetMaps is this public database that lets you download 3D models of buildings that relate to their height and position and maps. And this plugin is overall really comprehensive in the way that it brings in all these assets from different places online and kind of puts them together into one usable. So we'll get right into it, and in the end we'll also stylize that geometry in the way of a diagram, a city diagram. You see, like, this works really quickly, really efficiently here in order to make diagrams out of Blender that you can later use in Photoshop or whatnot and have different layers for the buildings. So the way this plugin kind of works is generate it from a new file. Once we're in the 3D viewport, we can go over to our plugin, OSM. It doesn't seem like a save, so if we go to Preferences, we'll hit Add-ons. We'll search here for OSM, Blender OSM. You see I don't have it activated in this file, so I'll just go ahead and check it off. If you don't have it in there, you can hit install from that link that's provided in the description. You gotta get that off Gumroad, off of the creator's name, who is a pro architecture. So with those files in that zip file, you would hit install, select that zip file, download it into here, and then hit the check mark. You gotta go through a few steps over here. So actually I have to go with them here. We can hit open. And wherever we've saved that downloaded file for the plugin, we're going to go into that folder and we're going to select a couple of folders out of here. So it's asking for us for the downloaded OpenStreetMap and terrain files. So wherever those are going to be saved, we'll go into where we downloaded our resources. So I'll go here, and it's a folder called assets that comes with the download. And right here for downloaded terrains, we'll double click in there and be within this folder where it says OSM terrain texture overlay and hit accept so that it goes in with that folder. And then we'll open a new one, go to the same folder, but instead of going into downloaded terrains, we'll go into assets. And with this now in full view, our building material templates, our vegetation, our asset packages, we'll hit accept. And we've set our assets, we've set our OpenStreetMap terrain files. We can move on to selecting one of these satellite images services. So ArcGIS, I believe, does charge a membership, and Mapbox lets you get a certain amount for free. So that would be Mapbox, make an account, and you create a token. Right, and with that token, once you copy it, you go back over into Blender and you paste it in for the Mapbox access, and you're all set. With that, we can hit Save Preferences and close that up. So now we have our plugin down here working just fine. We go to start off with Select, and it'll open up a link for us to select the map area. So Miami doesn't have much altitude. I'll go to a city, to Madrid. Has quite a bit of change in height and subway and different things running through it. So we'll select a bit of the center of Madrid with some of these parks as well. We'll hit Show Selection Rectangle, kind of make a box right here, and copy. You copy these coordinates, you can go back over to Blender and just hit paste. And with this drop down, the first thing we want to get into is downloading the terrain. With the terrain, we hit import, give that a second to load. We might have to zoom out, and we can go over to our view panel and extend our clipping end. Here we go. So you can see a bit more of the terrain there. Moving on within the plugin, going back to that tab, we switch from terrain to image overlay. and we select our Mapbox satellite for our source, set default material, and I'm going to go ahead and increase the max number of tiles. So you can do it by multiples of 256. So you can do 512, or in my case, I'll do 1024. And this has to do with the resolution of the tiles, the satellite images that it's going to basically be placing all over here. We'll hit import, and that might take a little bit of time as you see it loading on the bottom left. I'm covering it over here. But you have, there we go, a bit of a countdown there of what's going on, downloading a tile image from Mapbox. So it's basically creating this giant texture by compositing all these images together. If at any point anybody coming online, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and shoot them in the chat. The next step after this has a few options for bringing in buildings, and we'll go through all three and end up only using one of them really for the diagrams that we do at the end. Granted, keeping in mind that the max number of tiles that you do, you can go larger, up to 2,000 or 4,000 even pixels. Actually, it says the maximum might be 8K tiles. But the larger your tile resolution is, the longer this will take, and really the more tiles this thing has to generate. We're almost there, about 75% of the way. For those viewers that may be coming in from LinkedIn, there is a chat available within the YouTube stream. So if you want to go to the link in the bio to be able to access the chat, you can hit on the profile, go to the link in the bio, and select the YouTube stream. And I can see you here up on this chat that I have going. LinkedIn does not support chat at the moment for the live stream. There we go. We're done with our disclaimer and with downloading our tiles. So if I switch over to material preview by holding Z, I have here a map over the terrain. There's not as much level change as I thought, but there is some. And the next step in the plugin, we'll go from image overlay to the OpenStreetMap. And here we go down, we have our server, it's going to be put onto the terrain object, and we have 3D realistic, 3D simple, or 2D. So starting off with 3D realistic, if we hit buildings, there's a base level height you can set. So I found that 1.5 or 2 works well for a 1 to 2 story generic building that may not have a certain height. That's being able to read from the database from OpenStreetMaps. And alright, with that, we can go ahead and hit import. There is a way to link right over here a setup script. So the Buildify plugin that I've used in the past, I've used in conjunction with this plugin because you're able to simply find the file where you have your geometry node set up for building facades. If you don't know what I'm talking about, basically this sequence to be able to generate buildings that we went over in this channel previously. And what this does is it allows you to apply those geometry nodes, those custom building setups, those building blocks that you made of the different parts of the building all over the scale of the city. So we're still waiting here for OpenStreetMap to do its thing. Blender is currently unresponsive. Another thing to note is there is a tutorial out there for this plugin where the person giving the tutorial also used the technique to project the top portions of, or basically, yeah, project this Google site image over the building. So we can do that quickly in this stream as well. But that whole tutorial goes about how also setting up photos for the sides of the building, so you can use the roofs in combination with photos to quickly come up with a cityscape. We're still waiting for buildings here. The buildings that we're going to be brought in right now, they're actually from the asset library that we linked up from the plugin. So the plugin itself brings up generic building models that don't really have the best textures, but you can kind of modify them a little bit and also get that kind of look if not using any photos or not using any geometry in those setups. Thanks, Julian, for the comment there. I see that comments do come through LinkedIn, so interesting. Appreciate the comment, and anybody with any questions can go ahead and comment on the stream, I suppose, on YouTube and LinkedIn. Basically what we're waiting here on is OpenStreetMaps to download these buildings. I'll download all the data of the buildings, really the footprints, and there we go, we get it all in one snap. So the footprints extruded up, and those generic asset models I was talking about applied over everything. It doesn't look fantastic, but at this point, we can maybe start using this to start generating our scene. Make sure we have everything moving forward at this point. That's something that we can actually start using or making it look aesthetic. So there's this plaza right here. It looks like Plaza Mayor. So let's run with that. We don't have a camera in this scene. So I'll hit Shift right click to kind of make the center of the plaza the center of my model in a sense. Or at least have geometry come out of this area. So I'll hit Shift A and do camera. And with the camera in the scene, I can hit Control Alt 0 to have the camera snap over this section right here. And what I'm going to do is go to Object Properties. Excuse me. Set my rotation here to 45. So we have a 45 degree camera. Set Y rotation 0. And the Z rotation more or less be whatever you'd like, because we're going to go into our camera settings over here and go from perspective to orthographic. Then we just tweak the scale here. By having that wood angle at 45, we get everything at 45. So still not great. Let's go into our world settings, switch the color to white. So now we start to see something. We can bring up the strength. We're working with Eevee right now, and I'd recommend sort of set everything up with Eevee just because it's going to work faster on your computer. We can turn on ambient occlusion. We can turn on the ambient occlusion distance to something like 10. So what ambient occlusion does is next to these buildings right here, we get a little bit of a shadow coming up from the bottom versus if I hit 1, that shadow's less intense. So if we do 10, we kind of give that corner a bit of a shade. Moving on, we can go down and select bloom as well. We want to go into performance and hit high quality normals. We want screen space reflections, and in the shadows we can basically double or quadruple the values that we have here for cube size and cascade size. So I think that should do it fine. And high bit depth. What we want to turn off though is soft shadows, and that'll be evident in a minute. Let's keep it on for a second, and let's bring in a sun into the scene. So we can hit Shift A, and we'll add in a sunlight. Move that up. And there's another neat plugin. If you go to Edit, Preferences, search Sun in your add-on section. It's the sun position add-on. You can just enable it if you have Blender installed. And my file. Always hit Control S. It kind of comes up as a reflex. So we can go over into the world settings, and if we were to put in a HDRI here, we could have the HDRI match the sun position and use that setting, but the plugin will enable this section right here called sun position. So we have our sun object. We can just click here and select the only object that is a light in our scene, which is that sun. Collection that, no, that's it. We just select the sun object. We don't have a sky texture, although we could put one in. But just with that, we can now control the position of the sun through these settings here. So if I turn off my world light, now I'm only seeing what the sun is giving off. It's a little bit deceiving to see because we have a shadow in the Google Earth image. So we'll put in a plane here, shadows on, go back to our sun, and increase the strength. So we don't want it to be that strong, but we do see this shadow that it's casting straight down. Going back into our world settings, with the sun position, we can start to play with that with the day and the month and the year. So there we go. Change the month, or if the year were to make a difference. We can then change the time, so we can get a different time of day. So we could do something like this, maybe pushing the shadows away from camera a little bit. Give it a little bit of an offset. So something like that. Alright, still doesn't look great. So we have our shadows at least, but what we want now is to have a HDRI in the scene that's working with the sun. We'll do that by bringing in from the Blender Kit plugin we typically go to, hit HDRs. We can hit something in Spain. See if we get any search results for Spain. Yeah. I mean, that seems pretty close. Not Spain, but can do. Sure, why don't we do that? And now with an HDRI in our scene, we can bring up the strength of it just a little bit so that we soften the lighting in the scene a little and take away some power from those shadows that were so intense. Okay, so this is what we get with our 3D detailed buildings from the plugin. We go back to the plugin, we hit 2D simple. We then have import buildings, import water objects, import forests, import other vegetation, so on and so forth. We can import railways, and we have the same height. So we can hide these buildings here and hit import for the 3D simple buildings. We'll see, it shouldn't take as long as the previous ones that we were doing, the 3D realistic, realistic in quotes. But you can improve those image textures that we had on that model that was showing with other photos, or even, as I said, the geometry node setup. But that'll do for another stream when we combine these two to make the city in a very specific style. So yeah, coming up, it'll be pretty much taking what this plugin is doing along with the other geometry node one and be able to quickly create a city that's inspired by Italian architecture. Still waiting here for a little bit. If there's any viewers that want to put something in the comments, any questions, any feedback, any thoughts on, so something that I'm using for it here is architectural diagrams, but it could also be used for UI or UX maps or diagrams, really, any sort of like explainer, even like showing just paths, how to get one from one place to another for purposes of web display, for mobile display, etc. But if there's any other use case that you can think of, you're welcome to share that in the comments as well. And maybe that's something I could look into on how to do the graphics specifically for that use case. I remember the previous think I have to end up turning off the bloom in these as well, or at least taking away the intensity of it. The bloom being that glow that we were getting there at the end from both the sun and the HDRI map. Something I will mention when doing maps, especially if you're doing them close to bodies of water. Say like Miami is one that I've done quite a bit. You do a selection rectangle around here. What you want to do is the least amount of ocean as possible, right? Rather than keeping the original shape. Because you can always make more water in that direction. But you might as well use your real estate here, and you have to keep in mind that the bigger the area you select, the way slower your system is going to run, at least on the download phase. I haven't really ran into any issues of this crashing too much, even when just running it in rendered view with all these buildings and the way that I've set it up. So there's also these settings I didn't really discuss for the roof shapes in the advanced section or in the simple section, but we do have a setting to change the top geometry for that element. If we know that we want something particular, you know, like these mono-pitched are more commonly seen in Northern Europe, or these barn styles, and gable is more northeastern US. You can kind of tailor that type of shape. So this is where you have a terrain image projected onto the mountain, onto the terrain from a very top angle, and you see you get a little bit of distortion happening with the mountain. But what this person has done is what looks really good when you do this is when you actually match your sun to the direction the shadows are on the image on the Google Earth. So whatever building shadows or terrain shadows you're getting, try to place your sun so that the shadows that it creates match with what you have on Google Earth. And there we go. We killed enough time and we have our simple buildings. So these simple buildings are the ones I prefer to use for the diagrams. We go over here, and we are in rendered view. We can turn down the bloom as I had mentioned previously. So right here, bloom, we can lower the threshold, or rather increase the threshold. There we go. Okay, and we also got a bunch of streets with it. Pretty great. Because we can select whatever other gray object is. Or no, all the streets are gray. It's just reading the entire side of that as a street. So that's alright. We are getting some clipping here though with this white terrain. So maybe I just push this down. So these, like this image. I think that white section right there is just me, like a plane that I added earlier. The terrain here, I'm actually going to have it be this pedestrian areas. I'm going to switch that to a white. So over in materials, I'll hit this icon here for copying. And it says it's using, no, here's our base color. There we go. We can go turn it up to white. And what really ties this all together is we make these buildings. It has a different material slots for things. So we want to make the tops white, and then we can shade the sides like a light gray. So we'll go ahead and go into the roof material it has set and tune that to white. And then for the walls, we'll turn that into a light gray with no saturation. There we go. Neat, right? Looks like a little model. So we also have this in blue, this is water. I'm gonna just turn this into something metallic and very not rough with no color. the sort of like a reflected disc a little bit. Reflecting the sky texture, which isn't great. But I'm not going to worry too much about that now. What really can make an impact at the moment is adding a grease pencil object. So we'll add a grease pencil stroke. And what that does is go over to our modifiers here. If I were to enlarge this, what it is it's just a line. It's almost looks like a 2D stroke of a line, but it's a 3D object here in the scene. And what we can do is we can project this line all over the objects that we're looking at here. So if we take this over to the side, or make it small so we don't see it or notice it, and we want to keep it handy over here in our scene collection so we can refer back to it. If we tune down over to in the modifiers, we can find line art, and we select what collection we want the line art to go into. So whatever collection here was brought in from the plugin. So all our buildings and streets are in this collection. So that will go to our map 14 collection. And then we have to select the material. So we'll select the black line, and then we can increase the line thickness. Oh, we also have to select the color layer. So you just have to add a property here. Right now we see it in orange. If I click out of it, we've got some lines all over the buildings. And it takes a little bit of finessing to go through all these settings for edge types, light reference, geometry processing, to get rid of all this janky line that we don't want here. So it really simplifies the render. So crease on sharp, or turn off intersection over here. That does a great deal of help. Material borders can help, since we have the roof in one material and the walls in a different material. So wherever you change material, you can get a line. Some of these lines that break up aren't awful. It kind of reads like there's a change right there, or a fold on the road, in terms of its topography and whatnot. Kind of can read okay, especially if you tweak that later in Photoshop. So another thing we're getting is some missing lines here. If I turn off intersections, we miss out on some lines like these. So again, change the crease number here, so we can see we get more of a wireframe effect, or a little bit less of a wireframe effect. You gotta just find the sweet spot with all these settings. I do have it as a point to, at one point, like have this finessed enough. I think this is relatively a new feature that they've added in, this modifier for line art, although they've made a few tweaks to it in the late updates. So hopefully they keep updating this and can have a bit more control over the line work and be able to add different thicknesses. I mean, the way to add different thicknesses would just be to add different lines, but this is as max line thickness as we're getting at this moment. And you gotta kind of zoom in to see it, but when you kind of see it like this with a little bit of Photoshop cleanup, you can do real nice. So if we wanted to add an element here, this is where we'll finish it off. Let's say we add a mesh cone. Make that really large. And flip it around 180. And we can give that a new material and just kind of give it a color for now. Okay. And if we wanted to give this like an outline, or give all the buildings an outline, in fact, there is a couple of ways to do that. So one way would be to add a modifier for solidifying. And then once we have this, we go down to materials and hit a material offset of 1. Explain in a bit why we're doing it. So if we go over here to the materials for the object, we got a new material slot, new color, make this one black. Go back to our modifier, and when we change the thickness now, and another thing we had to do here was flip the normal. There we go. So now this is black. Have to tune the thickness and the offset here so that we get it to be just an outline. think I am missing a number here. An offset of 1. Much 0. Was solidify. The thickness. Trim. Zero offset of 1. Try this again. We have that material now. We do solidify, and we set that to a material offset of 1. You know what I'm probably missing here is a subdivision. So the geometry is probably not complex enough at the moment. No, I mean it's becoming interesting, but oh, I know. No? I've done this a few times, and I'm not quite sure why it's not working at the moment. I believe I'll have to circle back on that and edit it. So in any case, the other way of doing this, go to our Compositing tab, start using our nodes. So once we have a render, you hit F12 and render. If this is not what we wanted, we want to hide the other buildings. Still have a bit more than we need here, but that's alright. We'll have that render to work with. You'll be able to see it here if we add a viewer node in the compositor. Move this composite into here. We add in a cryptomat node with these scenes set up. If we go over to the right, with these layers, we want to enable down here in the cryptomat object material asset. We can add some more things like shadow, ambient occlusion that we can later use for more compositing. But when we hit render again, we now have all these different layers set up right here on the left hand side. If we see what this looks like, sort of a map. Working composite. We're not seeing the full image here. I gotta add a little bit. There we go. So we see it by material. We start adding and taking away from the selection. Let's see what that looks like. We want to select this and we want to take away roads. There we go. So we only have that. So that we can then set alpha. Adding these with Shift A. Want to invert the color. So we get that white section right there, and you can then do a dilate or erode. What that does is it lets us offset that outline a little bit. You might not need the invert actually, color ramp. But what we have now is essentially that black triangle a bit dilated or eroded, made larger, so that it can work as an outline for that geometry. If I add here a mix RGB node, oops, just a mix. You can bring in the original image along with this mask, set it to multiply. let's see, I don't believe it is set alpha that we want. It is, I do think it is alpha. Crypto mat into alpha. Well, I'll show it up with, I'll have it here in my previous base file, just to kind of show you what that ends up looking like in the compositor. And I'm gonna need to package all these different things together into one file and make it available for download so that we can have basically all this in one place. I've been putting together these different strategies for how to be able to make these architectural type diagrams straight out of Blender, because it runs very efficiently and it allows you to do animations. So if we were to do a timeline here, a keyframe for the camera, we could set it right here for its location, or even simply its orthographic scale here. We set that there, and then we move forward and bring that bar back. And move from a different place. So if we were to keyframe this position here, it's kind of like zooming in now. Over to this frame, where that section, frame here. Basically got a camera animation hovering over this map. You can continue to do things like duplicate the streets, trim them around, add emissive materials to the streets, so that, like this section of street, for example, I can go to its material and set the set the emission like a blue light. Yeah, and add some interesting additional results. Okay, so we're gonna call this here. I'm gonna hide these different elements and get out of render. If there's any viewers out there that want to ask a question at this time, typically look at that now in the Q&A at the end of the session about what's coming up, about this process, or about what's useful. Anything having to do with Blender might have that compositor on. Oh, I'm still using that. There we go. So it does render fairly quickly. See here a little bit. And there it is. Cool part about this as well is it keeps all these settings if you were to switch it to cycles. If I were to go over here and go into cycles render mode, set it to GPU, right? We have the same render result. I'm gonna hide the render. There we go. There's a bit more that you could do for this out of this session. I mean, you know, you can let your imagination run from here. You can add cars, you can add people, you can add trees, and it'd be also fairly quick if we had it in Eevee to use Botanique, something we've covered on this channel before, this other plugin for plants. If we were to snap these trees, for example, or something like this. I selected an area that doesn't have much greenery or water going on. You can also set those type of materials, grass and such. Even though here in Plaza Mayor I know there's no trees, but we start applying this all around. And I suppose the last thing I'll throw in here that can also be thrown as an ingredient is if you do have a bunch of trees like this laying around and you want to have everything sort of just shown as a clean plate, what we can do is come over to material override section and for cycles, so we switch that back to cycles, and we go all the way down to our layer properties. For override, we can override into any one material. So we could select, say, this existing white, so everything renders into white including the tree. So it's kind of a illustrative way of going about going off your renders here. Alright, we're going to call it there. We're going to take off the override and hit out a render of an image. So thank you all for sticking around. If you have any final questions before I log off, while this render goes on, I'll improve on this one for the final thumbnail. We see in cycles here, we can then save this image and even render out the Eevee and like apply those two one over the other in Photoshop to blend between the two layers. And of course in Photoshop you can take this much further. There is a little bit of cleanup that you might need to do with the streets that come around, which is getting rid of overlapping surfaces, which can be done by joining the geometries or in a number of different ways. But for the sake of the length of this stream, showing off the plugin initially, how you can bring it in and how to quickly get to an aesthetic like this, kind of hit our mark here. So, alright, thanks EM for dropping in. Thanks everybody, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a comment on what you thought was helpful in this video or what you would like to have seen in this one that could be coming up. It could be made done in the future, in a future stream. Thanks everybody, have a great night, catch you on the next one.